Hi, everybody. I hope you're well and staying healthy. So, by now, you should have already met the class and gone through some of the basic logistics that you need to take care of, signing the contract, and becoming a little bit more familiar with the planet, watching the planet movie, and getting up to speed on what's coming for the week. So, for this video, I want to talk about how you're going to go about finding the story that you want to work on for the rest of the quarter, and the kinds of strategies that you can use to be confident that you've got a good story. So, as you go into this class, the kind of writing that you're going to be doing is different from academic writing. So for those of you who haven't done journalistic writing before, it's going to require an adjustment. I've seen plenty of students for quarter after quarter who make that adjustment successfully. And my job is to help you learn these new skills. So as you go into this, you're really going to have to be three different kinds of people. You're going to have to be a detective. You're going to have to be a nerd, and you're going to have to be a storyteller. So let me describe that a little bit more. You're going to have to be a detective because your job is to go chase down facts. And sometimes these facts are hard to find. You're not quite sure where they are. You're not quite sure who knows them. And so you need to use a lot of initiative and creativity and common sense to figure out how you're going to get those facts. Who do you need to talk to? How are you going to get in touch with them? How are you going to get them to talk to you? What kinds of questions are you going to ask them? It's really a lot of the same skills that a detective uses when they're trying to solve a case. So you're going to accumulate all these facts. Another thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to kind of become a nerd on the subject that you're writing about. You are going to have to become something of an expert on it, and that means taking a really deep dive into whatever you're writing about. And then you're going to need to come back after that, and you're going to need to tell a story. So a story doesn't mean that you're dumping an enormous amount of information on someone. You're not writing for experts, even though you're going to become an expert. You're going to be writing for a typical reader of the planet. That's one of the differences between academic writing and storytelling is, well, first of all, you're telling a story. And second of all, you have to think about your reader. When you're writing an academic paper, you have a captive audience of one, usually, and that's the professor. But in this case, you're writing for people who could stop reading at any moment if they're not feeling engaged by the story, if they think the story is boring or confusing. And so it's going to be your job to tell the story in a way that is really going to grab people. So if your job is to go out and find a story, the first thing that you want to know is, what are you looking for? What looks like a story? So it has a lot of the same characteristics as a good story of any kind. So a good novel, for example. So there's some basic characteristics, and those include having a character or characters, real live people. It needs to be a setting. The story needs to actually take place somewhere. It can't just be this sort of abstraction. And another thing that it needs is it needs action. People often talk about conflict in stories, and conflict can be something that really drives a story, right? If you have a struggle between two political parties, that can be a conflict. But a lot of stories don't have a conflict that is that clear. But what a story does need to have is it needs to have action. It needs to have people who are engaged in doing something, trying to solve a problem, trying to figure something out, trying to rally people to do something. Whatever it is, you need people who are in action. And then finally, you need significance. It needs to be something that seems important to a reader, that will make them care about it. A common question that editors will ask reporters is, so what? And that's really the significance question. So what? Why do I care? And so you're going to be looking for stories that have significance. So let me give you an example of how this works. Oftentimes, when people start out, they have a topic that they want to write about, which is great, but a topic is not the same thing as a story. So here's an example from my own work as a reporter for Science Magazine. Up in Alaska, for years, there has been a struggle over an effort to build what would become the world's largest gold mine, potentially, right in the watershed of what is the world's largest sockeye run. So this is a big deal. It's a big deal for people who want to mine the gold, and it's a big deal for the fishers and for environmentalists, indigenous peoples, for all the people who rely on salmon. So I had been wanting to write about this for years, but I never could find out quite the way to get into this story. I couldn't just say there's this fight between these sides. It wasn't enough of a story. So Bristol Bay, I do have a setting. Here's a photo of Bristol Bay, and you can see that it's this remarkable landscape that barely any mark of humans at all. It's a really remarkable place. So there's a setting. That's great. But I really needed people in this story. I needed to revolve around something. And then I found out about Daniel Schindler. So Daniel Schindler is a fisheries ecologist who is at the University of Washington. And he has spent more than a decade up there studying the salmon. And the salmon runs in Bristol Bay. And he is the latest in a long chain of scientists from the University of Washington going back more than 40 years who have been studying these salmon. And Daniel is doing a lot of interesting research, and he's very passionate and outspoken. And so I thought to myself, well, this guy would be great. So I think I have a character so what's the action? Well, it turns out that Daniel's research actually very much connects to the questions around whether or not a mine should be built in Bristol Bay. And so his work is really at the center of this conflict. So his work is the action. And so you can see here he is in action, right? It's terrific. So when I finally found all these pieces, then I came to my editor and I said, hey, I think I have a story. He and I had been saying we should do something about Bristol Bay and the gold mine, but we couldn't quite figure out what it was. Now we had figured out what it was, and luckily I was able to go do a story about it. So you might be asking yourself, I'm stuck in my house. What does Bristol Bay have to do with me? So yeah, good question, right? I mean, it's not ideal conditions for reporting, I understand, but you can still do great stories from the situation that you're in. So here's an example. I was just looking in the newspaper the other day, and I learned about a company in the Ferndale area called Superfeed, which typically makes insoles for shoes, like sports insoles. And they're now reconfiguring their production line to make personal protective gear for doctors, like masks, right? So I thought to myself, well, that could be the heart of a great story, right? I'm not sure who the characters are yet, but there's got to be people at Superfeed who are engaged in this, right? And they'd probably want to talk about it. And so now I've got people, Superfeed people, and a setting, well, their factory, and maybe the doctors in the area who are short on masks, right? So there's a setting. And then as far as action, Well, I mean, there's the action of them trying to pitch in to help in this moment of crisis. So really, it's both a coronavirus story and a hope story. So a double header, right? Uh, and then, in terms of significance, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a crisis, but I think part of what you could do with this story is you could actually broaden the story out a little bit and talk about all the different ways that companies or individuals are trying to pitch in to deal with these equipment shortages, right? So the story could focus on Superfeed. But you could imagine some readers might say, well, that's nice, but I don't live in Ferndale, and, Superfeet, what are they to me? But I think you could broaden the story out a little bit. Superfeet could be at the middle of it, but then you could broaden out and bring up a couple of other examples of people in the area, whether it's somebody in their home who's sewing masks or another company. But I think that's how you wind up with a story. And so can you do that story from your home? Well, yeah. You can get on the phone and start calling people. Now, for photographers and videographers, you have an extra challenge. Sorry about that. But, right, you can't take photos over the phone. So for you, you're going to have to think about what kind of stories can I tell that I can take images of or get audio of, right? So for images, it might be something really close to home, like in your house or in your apartment. I want to make clear to people that your health and safety is of the utmost importance to me. So I do not want you to be violating or stretching the limit on any kinds of social distancing or shelter at home rules. You really need to do your reporting within those boundaries. I've talked to the faculty advisors at the Western Front and the Clipsun, and basically our policy is you're confined to the shelter in place. If you happen to be going out and doing other necessary activities that are allowed under the rule, like grocery shopping or exercising, and you bring along a camera with you, then that's acceptable. But beyond that, you really need to stay tight. So videographers and photographers, I understand there's going to be an extra challenge for you, and that's something that I'm going to work with you on, and something that your editors are going to work with you on. Okay, so these are the basic outlines of what a story looks like. So where do you go looking for a story, right? So for starters, go to the story list. We have more than 24 story ideas that editors and the past Planet class have contributed to. And these are all promising ideas. If they weren't, we wouldn't have them on the list. So take a look through that list and see if anything strikes you as good. So, but you can also rely on your own research and your own understanding. So a couple of places to look are news coverage. Just like I mentioned the Superfeet story, right? I found that by looking at the Bellingham Herald. So look at local news coverage. What are you experiencing? Think about yourself and your family and friends, right? What are people talking about? If people are talking about something, then maybe there's a story there, but you need to figure out the particular angle, right? So if lots of people are talking about masks and whether to wear them, right? So that's a topic. Is there a particular story there? Is there somebody who's making masks or trying to educate people about them or doing something that's distinctive or interesting about it? Okay, so story list, media, friends and family, social media, and also think about what interests you. Think about what is on your mind that might produce stories that relate to our theme. And once you have these topics in mind, then you can start to dig around for a particular story. If I have an idea, but I'm not clear on what the story is, I'll often go to Google News and I'll do a search. If you just do a search on Google in general, it's often a needle in a haystack. But Google News can be more effective because it narrows it down to news sources. So that can be a way to start. So that, but the real key is for you to dive in, to really to jump on things, to start to sift through. I understand, looking for a story sometimes can be the most stressful part of the job of a journalist. I'm speaking from personal experience. Once you have a story, then you can really get to work on reporting it. But finding a story can be a challenge, I understand. So that's what you should really be working on this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact your editors or me. But I think you should be able to get a lot of direction from the materials that I've provided you with. Okay. Now, the final thing that you're going to be producing out of this hunt for a story is the query letter. And I want to take you now and show you a detailed look at the query letter and how that's going to work. All right, let's go. Okay, everyone. I've talked a bit about what makes for a great story and some basics about how you can go find a great story. Now let's dig into the query letter assignment, which is your major assignment for this week. You're going to be turning it into your editors on Friday at 5 p.m. That's the final deadline. Before we dig in, if you have not read the query letter assignment, hit pause on this video, go read it, then come back and listen to the rest of this video. If you have any questions for me after that, please get in touch and I'll try to clear things up. But there should be a lot of information in the assignment for you. Okay, let's take a look at a great query letter. This will help you make one. This is a query letter by Tyler Cohen. You can see we're going to start at the top. Tyler includes her name, address, and contact information, a date, and then addresses it to the editor-in-chief at the time, Emily Dietzel. You do not want to address yours to Emily Dietzel because Alex Meacham is now the editor-in-chief, so address it to him. Okay, the point of a query letter is to persuade an editor that they want to hire you. And so you're really trying to dazzle them with your skills. And you're trying to demonstrate two major skills. One is that you're a reporter who can dig up lots of interesting facts. The other is that you're a writer. So you can take those facts and weave them into a compelling story about something that's interesting and important. So this is your way of doing that. Before I jump in, let me just show you that editors-in-chief from the past have written their own comments about what they like about this. So take a minute after this video and read through those, and those should help you a lot. Okay, here are my thoughts. The start of a query letter typically starts like the beginning of a story. This helps the editor visualize what the story is really going to read like when it's finally turned into them, and it helps them realize that they want to choose you to do it. Let's see how Tyler does this. First sentence, 200 miles off the western coast of Washington state lies the Juan de Fuca Ridge, a hotspot for hydrothermal vent communities that are keeping alien-like ecosystems alive against all odds. I'm already hooked. Tyler has talked about things being alien-like, so that sounds cool. And things alive against all odds. Well, that sounds kind of like a movie, right? So I want to go further. Over a mile beneath the ocean's surface, these vents spew ultra-hot water up to 716 degrees Fahrenheit that allows chemosynthetic organisms to thrive. No other life forms have been known to tolerate such extreme temperatures, let alone such immense pressure or the complete lack of natural light. Tyler has packed a lot of good information into this. The temperature of the water, how deep it is, the kinds of challenges, but it does not sound like a scientific paper. That's part of what makes it terrific. There's a lot of information, but it's fun to read. Tyler uses interesting language and language that's very straightforward and easy for anybody to understand. Okay, you can read the whole thing. I'm not going to read it all to you, but let's scroll down a little further to the next paragraph. How can life tolerate such extremities? Does the resilience of these creatures inspire hope for human-animal adaptations to rising temperatures? Will hydrothermal vents exist long after we're gone? What is it like to travel to the abyssal zones of deep sea? What do local researchers think about the iron-sulfur world hypothesis, and what does it suggest about our own mortality? Are these oceanic astronauts humbled by their discoveries? Could similar ecosystems exist on other planets? These are the questions I hope to tackle. Okay, those are a lot of questions. Frankly, this query letter has a few too many questions. It's a little bit of overkill. But what Tyler is doing is showing me that there are a lot of interesting questions that this story can explore.
she's helping to answer the question for me of why this story would be important or why it would seem significant. It's not just a bunch of facts, it actually delves into some really compelling and interesting questions. So, very smart to include questions like this. Maybe too many questions because it's hard for me to see how all of those could be jammed into one story. Okay, let's move on to the final paragraph. First paragraph has sucked me into the story, giving me some facts. The second one is talking about why it's significant and what the major questions are. Oh, and before I go a little further, let me add down here. It says, I plan on contacting Dave Butterfield, a UW professor and expedition participant who has dedicated his research to hydrothermal vent communities. I also plan on contacting Debbie Kelly, the chief scientist of Expedition 8, who also discovered the lost city. What's terrific about this is that Tyler is showing me that she has a very specific plan for how she's going to report this story. That helps an editor be confident that you're actually going to be able to execute on the reporting. You show them that you already have names, you know where they're located, you know what they do. That's a good sign. Okay, on to the final paragraph. As an environmental science major and a marine science scholar at Western Washington University, I have intuitive knowledge on ocean science that would make me an ideal candidate to write this piece. I also have experience in explaining complex scientific concepts to students with various levels of prior knowledge through my job as a chemistry tutor. This final paragraph is really selling me on why Tyler in particular should be the person reporting this. Tyler has already convinced me that there's a great story out there, but maybe I want to assign that story to someone else. The final paragraph is really the way to convince me that you are the person who should be doing it. And at the bottom, of course, best Tyler Cohen. And then at the very bottom, you want to list a few other stories that you'd be interested in doing as well. That's because not everybody can be assigned the story that they want. Sometimes you have multiple people pitching for one story. This is your chance to list the other kinds of stories that you'd like. Okay, best of luck, and I look forward to reading your terrific query letters.
Okay, everyone, that's all for now. Be well, stay safe, and happy hunting.